Greetings, Regional Modernism students. I hope this finds you well on this Friday and having had a productive week. I wish you a good Friday and I wish you a very relaxing and rewarding weekend. I was thinking about abstract expressionism and Jackson Pollock this week. Given your focus, it's interesting that given this week's focus on abstract expressionism, on the dynamic of a particular American manifestation of modern art being used by the federal government in its culture war with the Soviet Union as a way to emphasize and to celebrate individual creativity, the integrity of autonomous human freedom in the face of totalitarianisms on the left or the right. And also what's interesting is that the other course I'm teaching, some of you are taking that course as well, the Writing Art Criticism course. This week we're also looking at abstract expressionism. So we've seemed to have the vectors of these regional modernism and writing art criticism have intersected this week. And so I've been doing a lot of thinking about abstract expressionism and Jackson Pollock in particular. But it's interesting that abstract expressionism is an American manifestation, but an American manifestation painted by immigrants. Functioning, these artists are also known, the broader context is the New York school community. They were working in New York, but very few of them were actually from New York. Barnett Newman was one of the few that had actually attended college in New York City. He attended the City University of New York, Hunter College, I think, in the CUNY system. De Kooning came from Amsterdam, Rothko from Russia, Gorky from Russia. Franz Klein from Pennsylvania. They had come to New York from someplace else, and many of them were immigrants. And so it's interesting, even in that context of the triumph of American painting, which was the title of art historian Irving Sandler's book on the movement, one of the first books published in 1970, I think. But even a distinctively American artistic practice is one that is generated on immigrants, on refugees, on expatriates. But something else I want to talk to you about regarding Pollock and the role of place. So an important component of the New York school and abstract expressionism was New York City, and not just New York City in general, Manhattan as an island, but a few particular neighborhoods south of 10th Street. A particular set of neighborhoods that had abandoned buildings where some of the artists could squat, throw down a mattress, and live rent-free if the owners of the buildings didn't know that they were living there, which meant they needed to work at night, stay in through the day, or be very conspicuous during the day. Had places where there was a bar that they could get a reasonable drink in the evening, cafeteria where they could hang out, nursing a coffee without having to pay much. They could sit all day and talk and not have to pay much for the table, just for some coffee refills. And some abandoned buildings, storefronts where they could clean out and use to show their work, but not with any real hope that anybody would actually see the work. They would get together and talk about art. It was a social community within which their paintings, their works of art were means by which it affirmed their identity in this community. One of the problems that Pollock had was that he was a raging alcoholic, and the amount of drinking that took place amongst the artists was problematic. It's problematic for many of them. And Pollock's wife, the artist Lee Krasner, believed that not only Pollock's capacity to make significant paintings was jeopardized through alcohol, but his life as well. And she worked with the dealer Peggy Guggenheim and then the dealer Betty Parsons to find a place outside of the city for she and Pollock to live and work. And so Betty Parsons paid Pollock a monthly stipend, created an opportunity for them to rent a house on Long Island, in the Springs, Long Island, near the Hamptons. And it was there, around late 1949, 1950, that Pollock began making his famous drip paintings, the poured paintings. And they were made not in a large studio context in the city. They were made in a tiny little barn in the backyard of a Long Island farmhouse in a tiny little town that consisted of a few storefronts and homes separated by long blocks of winding road. And it's there that Pollock was able to stop drinking and to be able to make those famous drip paintings in a tiny little barn, away from his friends, away from alcohol, out in the country. Oftentimes these paintings are interpreted as dynamic interactions of modern life and the hustle and bustle of the city and that kind of language. But the work was made in the country, and any kind of tension and sharp edge experience that we get from those paintings come from Pollock's emotional state made in the country, these paintings made in the country and made in a tiny little barn. One of the privileges I had as a graduate student at Stony Brook University from 1989 to 1981 was to be able to spend quite a bit of time in that, at the Pollock Krasner House, as it's called, and spent a lot of time in Pollock's studio. Stony Brook University owned the Pollock Krasner House, had a partnership, and so each fall we had a beginning of the year party at the house, and to go into that barn and to see how small it was, to see the paint drips on the floor, to recognize that he was painting on unstretched canvas, just laid out on the floor and cut, oftentimes cut after he had finished painting. No room. He'd be stepping on the canvas as he poured the paint and splattered the canvas with the butt end of his brush. And to see these expansive, monumental paintings installed at the Museum of Modern Art or at the Metropolitan Museum betrays their origins in this tiny little barn. The specificity of artistic practice. And then the fact that Pollock himself and his paintings became an international symbol of American art, of American modernism, of the freedom of the artist. So to think about that, the specific context in which that work was made and how it emerges from that and how it connects in such diverse ways that the work appears universal, international. These paintings generated by this struggling alcoholic finding peace and solace only in that barn. A tiny little barn that generated such big and ambitious, hopeful work in a man for whom hope seems only to have been manifest on that canvas. Well, I hope these thoughts are helpful to you, and I am going to be in New York City next week teaching. I have a very early flight on Monday morning, so I'm hoping to be able to send to you next week, week 7, email on Sunday night. So be looking for that, and I will be in touch. I hope you have a good weekend. I also simply want to say, I mentioned this to the video chat that I just taped to my writing art criticism students, that this has been a very difficult season. The session 2 in the fall has come at a very bad time in my life, and so I continue to beg your patience and my apologies for not being as present as I should be. And so you will hear from me again shortly. Take care.